please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
A high-level panel led by Justice B.N. Srikrishna has submitted its recommendations on the data protection framework to the government. The 67-page report is overarching in its scope as it deals with how companies and the government should handle personal data. It also defines what qualifies as personal data. The report calls for changes to many current laws, including the Aadhaar Act, the Right to Information Act and the Information Technology Act. The report also deals with where and how companies should store their data. While the draft looks into various key issues plaguing the data ecosystem in India and offers protection to the common citizens' personal data, the question is, will the stringent procedural reform that the report proposes hurt India's innovation economy? Another area of criticism of the report has been the kind of power the state will wield if this draft is to be accepted. And more importantly, is this a future-ready legislation? Good evening. Thanks for joining us on CNBC TV18. I'm Shireen Bhan and you're watching Eye on India. Joining us on the show today, Manan Godil, Chief Information Security Officer at Edelweiss Group. Also with us, technology analyst Prashant K. Roy and Vidur Gupta, Partner Cybersecurity Government at EY India. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the show. Vidur, let me start by asking you, we had a conversation a few weeks ago. We were still awaiting the report from the Srikrishna Committee. It's now out. We also have the TRAI's recommendations on its version of a data protection framework. And the key difference, if I could articulate between the two, is really ownership of the data. An issue where the Srikrishna report is silent and the TRAI says that ownership must be in the hands of the individual. How do you see both these, and especially the Srikrishna report?
So, thanks, Shireen. Let me say, perhaps with the positive thing, a very positive move, specifically in terms of around at least defining very clearly what is personal data, what is sensitive personal data. There is going to be an enforcement agency around it. There's also going to be things like data protection elements, be it right to forgotten, right to for correction, specifically penalties. So from that perspective, I would say I think it's pretty comprehensive to start with. Yes, I do agree that many of the responsibilities or elements have been moved to the specifically the data subject. That's going to be there. But from a fairly robust data protection agency which is going to come in, I believe that this recommendations, one converted into the act, will pave a way for going forward.
Okay, so the Data Protection Authority, you believe is a step in the right direction. But Prashanta, let me ask you this, and let's talk about some of the areas of the Srikrishna Committee report where eyebrows have been raised. And let me start by talking to you specifically about this business of a mirror copy. In fact, the bill suggests that for any processing activity of personal data inside or outside India, a mirror copy shall be required to be retained in India. Is this bad news for companies? What is it finally going to mean in terms of costs, specifically, especially for the small and mid-sized players?
It's worrying, all right, and to that extent I disagree a bit with what Vidur was saying. It's good that they've defined what is personal data, sensitive personal data, but they've sweepingly added just about everything into it. And therefore all of that stuff requires a mirror copy. So financial data, passwords, I mean, we'll come to that later, but how on earth are you going to have passwords for every service you use sitting in India? Now this mirror copy thing, this is something that eyebrows had been raised when the RBI in April floated its data localization demand on payment service providers. This one goes a step forward and makes it incumbent on all financial services providers to store their data here, and goes further and says if somebody defines it as critical data, then it has to be only, so that only thing which RBI had put in and was digging its heels on has not been addressed, which makes it a deal breaker for a lot of global financial services companies who use global systems, platforms and tools. And it's just not just a matter of cost of moving a platform here or a box here or a server here. It's global tools, it's global third-party processors, it's fraud mitigation platforms, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of that. How on earth are you going to mandate a shift to India? This is more nationalism than digital economy. Okay, you're saying that this is more nationalism than digital economy. It's interesting because the day that the Srikrishna report was put out for public consultation, I spoke with Justice Srikrishna and he seemed to give the impression that the Reserve Bank had in fact jumped the gun with that circular on localization. But in fact, if you look at the recommendations of the Srikrishna report, as you're pointing out, this goes 2 steps forward or 2 steps backward, however you want to look at it, on the issue of localization. Manan, how do you read this?
So as far as localization is concerned, well, the question, too many questions. There is no clarity on what kind of expectations are there. When I look at, the way the current, technology adoption is moving, the direction in which the technology adoption is moving, the biggest question that we have at hand right now is, if at all everything is considered to be localized, then how will the other organizations, especially the technology organizations, adopt to this requirement? One side we are looking at globalization. The biggest challenge that we will have here is for organizations like us to adopt to the two sides.
So you're in agreement with Prashanto that this is a deal breaker, that it cannot work, it's not practical.
I would want to slightly deviate there, and I would seek more clarity, because it's not clear according to me. This can be more to do with, the expectation in terms of what kind of localization are we expecting, what kind of data. If we are talking about data storage back here in India, and, while we make sure that, the information is available abroad as well, then how what is it, what kind of data is it which is supposed to be stored here in India, and, so that's perhaps a little more on what we would expect clarity on. Okay, so you require clarity on what kinds of data will need to be here in India. But if I hear what Prashanto is saying,
Bidur, it pretty much leaves the entire gamut open for everything that needs a mirror copy will need to be here in India as well.
Absolutely. If you actually read the current draft, that's what it means. While there's a clear provision that there's going to be certain thing called critical personal data, which will not be allowed for cross-border transportation, but at the same time, it virtually says that you have to have a mirror copy of the entire data personal information that you are processing out there. So yes, it's virtually like a double image or mirror image that you have to have in India. Okay, so that's one point of contention or concern, and that brings us to the other, because you talked about critical data, Bidur, and the fact of the matter is that the issue of defining critical data has now been left to the central government. So, health, government services, infrastructure, Aadhaar, genetic, biometric data, anything that the government decides or defines as critical data, again, leaves the room and the window or the door open for all kinds of things to be included. Prashanto, how much of a concern and a worry is this, the kind of power it rests with the state?
That is of extremely high concern, because A, it is arbitrary, B, it leaves the door open for a whole lot of organizations and agencies jumping in and trying to define what is critical. And I think a very good example of that is, last week, and what has just been released as the draft national policy on e-commerce, is actually demanding that all search engine data, all e-commerce data, all of this should be mandated to be stored in India, and then only in India. Now, it's not very clear in all these conflicts of what the RBI is saying, what the Commerce Ministry is saying. Will Sri Krishna override all of that and replace all of that? But it is very worrying that all these organizations, TRAI also jumped into the fray, but interestingly, it was a very progressive document. Now, if this is left to the government to define that what is critical sensitive data, and that critical actually means that you have to do it only in India, how are you going to expect, all of email, all passwords? I mean, that is a complete no-no and a deal breaker. Is just not possible. All financial systems and Visa and MasterCard and all of that, to move their data in a way that is only in India, and they do not have access. They isolate themselves from all global platforms and tools.
That's a point that's concerning a lot of people, and Manan, I want to get your views on that. A, the fact that critical data has pretty much been left ambiguous. It will be left to the state to decide what constitutes as critical data. And second, to the point that Prashanto was making, I mean, what is this going to mean in the internet age, essentially?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Prashanta on that front. In terms of data, this sounds very comprehensive, a very detailed list, and the biggest challenge that we may have would be how will all of this work. Now, this is a big question. I'm sure there are enough minds at work. which have been involved in making sure that this whatever comes out is of good quality. So I would still want to leave it open, for the committee to give clarity on what is it that is behind the thought, which has brought us to this point.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm saying again, I think I would want to leave this open right now, primarily because
when it is open,
I'm
you
sure
don't need to leave it open. It is open. The question is that how do we move forward? It is open. That's the problem that we're facing. But I want to then talk about.
No, I think no, Shireen, I would want to mention here that at the outset, I appreciate all the efforts that the Sri Krishna Committee has taken in bringing out something which is much needed today. So while we are still in the draft version, I'm sure there are enough conversations which will happen around it, and we will have the right to be heard, where we will seek clarity and which will help us
you certainly
decide next steps.
You certainly have the right to be forgotten, though the Sri Krishna Committee's version of it is not complete erasure. So hopefully you will have the right to be heard. But
just to add, Shireen, I think the only thing is that the fear is that it should not happen that the entire sensitive personal information gets classified as a critical data. Yeah. So that should not happen, at least.
Yeah. Prashant, since you brought up the e-commerce policy and you talked about the move towards nationalism that seems to be reflected in the draft that we're seeing. For instance, in the e-commerce policy, this business of making the RuPay card mandatory as far as transactions are concerned. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so interestingly, the Commerce Ministry has been really bringing in the RuPay card into discussions in a number of places. A lot of the, the digital payments initiatives and most from the government were focused on trying to push both UPI, which is a good thing, and the RuPay card. I think the government has been, and different parts of it have been getting too prescriptive about what particular instrument to use. I don't think it is the place of the Commerce Ministry to say that use RuPay versus MasterCard, etc. Enable a framework where innovation can succeed and compete. I think it is worrying the level of prescriptivity as a prescription that they have kind of gone into in trying to define that this should be used and that should be used. And keep in mind that all of these players are not going to sit quiet. I mean, there will be reciprocal action. If we erect barriers, if China is our gold standard and we say, oh, they have a great wall, and so we are doing exactly the same thing, so what's wrong with that? But these guys, okay, some of them exited China, Google exited China. There will be reciprocal action from the United States. We have $130+ billion of software exports, which is predicated on the global cross-border free flow of data. That will be jeopardized if we erect barriers of the kind that we are doing, putting in impractical things like all passwords to be stored in here, all data to be stored in here and only here, and cannot be processed for AI, for machine learning, for data sets and things like that. We're not sitting in isolation with one-way traffic. We have an enormous skin in the game with the entire software exports and BPM exports industry.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. This is something that we've discussed, that we're already too far into the game to try and now create these barriers and try and sort of convert ourselves into an island, because we've gone too far into integration to now start to pull back. But Vidur, I want to talk to you about, and this is again something that we had discussed a few weeks ago, about the route that India has taken with respect to global regulation, specifically the GDPR. When we talk about the kind of penalties that the GDPR proposes, the Sri Krishna Committee report seems to have taken the same route forward. But, criminal liability, it's a non-bailable cognizable offense that the Sri Krishna Committee is now talking about. How do you see that?
Yeah, Shireen, I think you're right. While the intent was perhaps good, that take up some good leading practices from GDPR, but taking it to the criminal offense or to that extent is way too high. And perhaps what I would definitely feel that we should have factored in that somebody like a Europe or somebody like a UK did take almost 10 to 12 years, or maybe more than that, 20 years to mature in their entire data protection journey. So perhaps for India as well as a country, we need to give in that time. Financial penalties, yes, a good deterrent, but stretching it Maybe some of the elements in the draft bill are stretching it too far.
You know, since we're talking about the draft and the areas that require improvement or definitely require discussion, outside of the ones that we've already talked about, Vidur, what are the other areas of concern that you would like to flag?
So perhaps one or two things. One is that while the entire data protection bill is around transparency and building a trust, but I still see a lot of exemption which has been given to central government bodies for certain cases, of course, but perhaps a clarity on what those exemptions are and how do they still ensure the accountability of that entire citizen data that they're going to have. That's one. Second thing, if you go through it, the Data Protection Authority, which is going to come in, has going to have too many activities in their with their hand, you know, be it starting in terms of to decide is that a data breach significant enough, or in terms of defining what is critical personal data, and then so on and so forth. In fact, even data security audits, data protection audits. So perhaps they should have also tried to ease out with some mix of self-regulation as well as this Data Protection Authority coming in, because otherwise there are going to be too many things which are going to be loaded to one single agency.
Okay, Prashant, the same question to you. Outside of the areas that we've just touched upon, what are the other areas that you'd like to red flag?
I think that I agree with the areas Vidur highlighted, and ownership of data is a very critical thing for me. Do I own my data?
Yeah.
It does not look like it from this entire document. I don't, and even a breach, somebody else, an authority is going to determine whether I should be informed, and is critical enough to inform. So I think these are two very, very clear red flags. The right to be forgotten, that's another thing. I mean, that's simply not there in this. How the way they've defined right to be forgotten, it just doesn't make any sense, that they have to stop sharing data, etc. Right to be forgotten involves erasure.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing, the deal breaker, will center around the localization, the harsh localization initiatives that are coming in across the board and apparently seem to be directed from the PMO.
Well, yes, that's the buzz, but there's already a fair degree of resistance, especially from the US when it comes to the localization issue, and it's publicly been stated it's been taken up at the level of the Commerce Minister's meeting when he last visited the US as well. Do they fall short? That's what we're talking about. Manan, you know, highlight for us outside of the localization issue, which you said that you would want more clarity on, as well as how the Sri Krishna Committee report will finally decipher or define critical data. What are the points for consultation that you would like them to take forward?
Well, most of my points are taken over, but one important thing which I felt which I really didn't see here is there could have been a mandate of some sort of certification that an organization should adopt to something like a PCI DSS, which also can be included. Something like a HIPAA can also be included as part of a mandate, which perhaps can further strengthen the the protection controls, and it might make it easy for the Data Protection Authority also to carry out the function effectively.
We don't know whether this is going to be legislated in the tenure of this government or not. The consultation process is now going to get underway. This is a draft at this point in time. But given the thinking that we seem to be seeing, whether it is this committee's report or in fact it is the e-commerce policy, what concerns you, Vidur, today?
So I think perhaps to start with, Shireen, I do see that they have factored in a phase-wise implementation. At this onset itself, they've given a clear mandate of close to 18 months to go in, whenever the day the
And you believe that
enacted.
that is enough and that's practical to make the transition?
Yes, it is, except the most debatable one,
which
in terms
is
of having the
localization.
localization, the mirroring copy. The other ones, I still feel, yes, is practical enough. But there's one catch to it, as I was just saying, that there's going to be a lot of things, a lot of elements which a DPA or the central body has to come in and inform in terms of certain definitions, certain code of conduct. So hoping that happens in time, that happens within the set period of 3 months or 6 months, and then only the remaining period is being given to the corporate organization or to the government entities to follow that. So I would say in that sense, yes, it looks fair.
Okay. Manan, the RBI circular, which was issued earlier with the deadline of October for payment operators to localize data, so to speak, that stays. Justice Sri Krishna has made it clear that once this law comes into effect, it will override other laws. But for now, that RBI circular, unless withdrawn by the central bank, stays. So how is the ecosystem coping with it? What are the changes, for instance, that you may have had to see, or what are you observing?
Yeah, so this has brought about a phenomenal change in the way organizations operate, I would say. And there are many things which have been adopted by the system. Now, introduction of something like data protection bill will be relatively, I would say, easier in that sense, because we've moved an inch towards that direction, and quite a bit has been achieved already. Mm-hmm. So that's my view on how we, how this RBI circular has helped in that sense.
Okay, Prashanto, I'll give you the final say now. On balance, given what we've seen and heard from Justice Sri Krishna, where does this leave us today?
I think I remain very concerned about the set of 3 or 4 policy initiatives, starting with the Reserve Bank circular and the e-commerce policy, which are less to do with the long-term digital economy and more to do with the short-term run-up to 2019, the shades of nationalism, putting in things which long-term will have serious repercussions and maybe even retaliatory action, but short-term may bring in nationalist brownie points. I think there needs to be a serious relook at this, and I really wish regulators like the RBI, for example, who were a lot more autonomous, stronger and independent and resistant to external pressure, would be able to look at for example, the health of the payment ecosystem long term rather than 2019. And I'm not sure that has happened.
Okay, so not necessarily future ready. That's the view coming in from Prashanto. Vidur and Manan hoping for more clarification from the Sri Krishna committee through the consultation process now that the draft report has been made public. Well, we'll see how this pans out, and we will keep tracking those developments here on Eye on India. For this evening, Vidur, Prashanto and Manan, appreciate you joining us here on Eye on India. That's a wrap then on this edition. Thanks very much for watching.